What's up, everyone? Kevin Leslie and a solo edition of the At the Thousand podcast, diving into 2K testing. Three things athletes, particularly high school rowers, college athletes, whatever it may be, masters athletes, need to truly understand in order to maximize 2K performance. And I think this is a great conversation for right now. The fall season just ended. A lot of athletes have already done a 2K, to kind of wrap up the fall season, especially on the high school level. In the future, people are going to be starting to ramp up 2K testing. And I like to bring this conversation to the table today because this is a very common time for me to get screenshots of athletes doing 2Ks, and some with high excitement and others with disappointment. And so hopefully some of these areas that we're going to talk about today will help athletes better navigate those first few weeks of training. So here we go. But with that, one of the things that is on my mind today, I just got, when I was thinking this morning, I've been, one of the things I've been constantly thinking about and I feel like it's going to be helpful for people as they embark on winter training, but the word momentum keeps coming into my mind. And the reason, right before we get into our three tips, three keys to 2K success, the reason momentum comes into my mind, I have an athlete that I'm currently working with. We're doing a lot of training together, both on your own and in person. And probably this particular athlete, high school athlete, who I'll talk way more about in the future, has very ambitious goals and is probably working harder than anyone that I've really ever met in the high school rowing world. And that's by design because of their goals. And through that, we've had a lot of in-person coaching, connection, and a lot of conversations so I could really get to know this athlete. And it's been we're going on about 3 months now, 3 months actually. And just a lot of time spent being very purposeful in their 2K pursuits for the purposes of college rowing. And again, there's going to be a lot of conversation down the line regarding, is this the right path and, all these different things. But one of the things that keeps coming to mind is momentum, because over the course of the last few months, we've been on a very big roller coaster of emotion, of performance, of all these different things. And this is an athlete who I would probably say back in October was a self-defined erg resistor. They did not love the erg, right? It was not their thing. And through these ambitious goals, part of the conversation, part of the approach has been getting them to truly appreciate the machine for what it is, develop a passion for training. And that's been very, very challenging in many ways. But the reason momentum comes to mind today is because we finished this hard session yesterday, and October, right? October was one of those months where it was the roller coaster, and we were kind of at that trough of the cycle, right? We were at the kind of the lower point, right? Injury and motivation and all these different things. November, these last few weeks, we're going on to probably 2.5 weeks of perfect training relative to this athlete. And I asked her yesterday, we did one of my favorite workouts, 8 by 5 minutes on the erg, 2 minutes rest. And the goal is to get kind of 8 to 10 splits above 2K. And we've done it a few times. We've cycled through it a few times. And I love this workout because it's a base level fitness assessment that is very much doable when you're training on your own. And she did it, probably her third time doing it this fall, and absolutely crushed. Just great workout, new PR, new personal record for that specific workout. And I asked her, again, self-defined erg resistor. I asked her after that workout, I asked her, hey, I'm starting to sense you're starting to like the erg. You're starting to enjoy this process of maximizing your effort on the machine and receiving objective data through the Concept 2 erg. And she started to smile and said, I don't know if I really like it, but I do love taking my anger out on it. And the reason, which is a great response, full honest response. The reason I love that, again, that's been the whole goal this fall. And these last 2.5 weeks, I would say, since the start of November, we started to realize that appreciation for the machine and the value that it brings to us in seeing, again, objective performances, right? Seeing yourself go from, a PR on 8x5 minutes to starting to see yourself progress to eventually seeing yourself progress in 2,000 meters and so on and so forth. So it's been really exciting. And momentum to me is the most important, very challenging thing to kind of grasp a hold of and carry through week after week after week. And that's where the winter can kind of be that grind that exposes a lot of athletes. Not exposes, it's very fleeting, being able to get that momentum and not being able to truly grab a hold of it and allow it to carry you into that next day can be very challenging for a lot of athletes. But I think once you get it, can you try to keep it going? And if you start to lose it, can you have that short-term memory and move on to the next one? And that's been what has been working for this particular athlete. Again, more details to come further down the line, but they're absolutely crushing it. And they don't like the erg, but they like to take their anger out on it. So I love that response. But with that, let's dive in. I'll try to keep this one brief. Thanks for bearing with me for the last 7 minutes or so as I chat about some of the stuff that's happening in the garage. We have our winter training program starting in a less than or a week and a half, essentially, right? We'll have a full group in the garage, maximizing their winter, which is going to be exciting too. But 3 things rowers need to understand and maximize 2K testing. I just sent it out in a newsletter. So, you can go to the website and receive kind of written copies of this. I try to send newsletters once a month, but now we're doing a solo episode on it. And this is one of my favorite topics. And I think right for this time here, as we, kind of athletes are a week or two out from being in full on winter training mode. But as we start to think about this 2,000 meter testing, maximizing your 2K, the winter is the best time for erg performance. Why? Because the only way, speaking more for the Northeast up here, right, where it's cold and you're not on the water, docks are out, river's frozen, at least in the future, you're on the erg more frequently. You're on the erg daily. You're pushing, yourself to new limits. You're in a team environment, hopefully, and you have the opportunity to truly start to see your 2K progress. So in the winter, this is when you need to really or if this is your pursuit, knuckle down and try to push your 2K to new levels, right? Get new PRs and all that. However, a lot of athletes have issues being able to truly see themselves, or the ability to perform at the highest level, right? They set, themselves up for failure because of, again, I think things that are very much in your control. And so hopefully these three tips will help athletes. These three key considerations will help athletes as they navigate that first 2K of the fall or that next 2K of the start to winter, right? Whether it's in early December or late December or in 2026. So the first one is set realistic expectations. This is huge because I feel like oftentimes athletes, especially high school rowers, where they perceive themselves as here, but the numbers don't back it up. And the reason they see themselves as here is because they don't have numbers that can really back it up, right? And that'll be kind of a point that we'll talk about later on. But they set these lofty expectations, right? Of, hey, you know what? Like, I really want to break 640 for 2K on this next one. Or if you're a high school girl, I really want to break 750 for 2K on this next one. but they have no prior training that tells them this is a realistic target, or they haven't been on the erg enough, especially in the fall, to justify a PR by 10, 15, 20 seconds. And the issue that you often see is they shoot for that target because they think in their mind that this is a realistic benchmark to hit, a realistic goal. And very soon, early into that piece, they realize they made a mistake and they can't sustain that pressure. And they fly and die, and they are left after that piece with more questions than answers. They have no idea what they could truly do if they had a realistic target. So with that, trust the numbers, trust the prior training, and set realistic expectations. That way you can set yourself up for a performance that gets you a baseline, essentially, right? You want a baseline in November, December. You don't need to be a finished product. Get yourself a realistic baseline to reset erg zones if that's what you're using, or to, basically have a new realistic target that you can shoot for. It's better to approach this first one at 90% and have a close to PR, but not a PR, than shoot for the PR at 110% and land at 20 seconds behind your goal split, your goal target. And I think that's what I often see, right? Athletes kind of set these unrealistic expectations that are based on prior tests in the spring, or this gut feeling that, hey, my teammate just went 7:45, so I feel like I can do the exact same. And they set themselves up for failure, and they walk out with more questions than they do motivation and answers for the next one. So that's one. Set realistic expectations. Number two, and this kind of aligns with number one, test the waters before 2K day. And what I mean by that is prep work over everything. Oftentimes, athletes go into their first 2K or even second, and they string together a couple of bad performances. They lose motivation. They really struggle to, execute the next one and have all this success because they never expose themselves to the rhythm that comes with 2K, the intensity, right? The splits that you're going to be holding, and the duration holding that split for 5, 6, 7 minutes and then having a finish at the end. They don't expose themselves to that. And then when they go about the piece, having not been there in months, right, since last spring, late winter, that third 500 punches them in the gut harder than it ever has because they haven't been there before. And that's where they start to unravel. And again, they're walking off that erg with more questions than motivation. And that can all be resolved or minimized, right? Minimized with prep work, prior prep work before going to do a 2,000 meter test. So I've talked about this before, but like some of my favorite ones, like, hey, 8 by 500 meters with 2 minutes rest. That's a version of prep work, right? And before all that, right, if you haven't been on the erg at all, don't expect to PR on this first 2K, right? You got to get it back on the erg because the water is not the erg. And if you're on the water all fall and you haven't been on the erg at all, your first 2 to 4 weeks should be getting reacclimated to the erg. But let's leave that aside. Let's say you are back to a good erg rhythm. 8 by 500 meters, 2 minutes rest, right? That's a classic where if you do that workout, it's not that hard to do on your own. And you're probably, right, if you max that workout out, 1 to 2 splits off of that is probably a good 2K baseline to shoot for, right? So let's say you do that workout and you go 150 splits, right? You average 150 and you went all out, you maxed it out. Okay, well, realistically, 152 should be a good average that you seek for that first test of the year, right? How you get there is what we're going to talk about next. But 152 based off that 150 prep work should be a good realistic target. To me, that's an example of a fitness prep work example, right? That's testing, are you physiologically capable to hold this number for 2,000 meters for 7-8 minutes, 6-7 minutes, right? Another one that athletes can do after they have a little bit more comfort on the erg, they maybe have done 8x500, they've done a couple other really challenging pieces, to kind of get that exposure to the erg. Another one that athletes can do is, and I love this one, but 2x1,000 meters. Rest is long, right? Take as much rest as you need. But after a good erg warm up, right, a full on 2K warm up, 25 to 30 minutes, right? Because you want to make sure that you're good and warm and loose before you do a 2K, 2x1K. And all you're thinking about, this is more of an exposure type of, test or prep workout, right? You're exposing yourself to the distance in a way that, okay, I'm going to do 2x1,000 meters, plenty of rest in between. What I want to do is expose myself to that first 1K prior to when the third 500 comes. So what you're going to do is you're going to treat it like 2,000 meters and you're just going to go to 1,000 meters, right? 1,000 meters done. You're exposing yourself to that feeling of, okay, I'm about to enter the third 500. This is how I'm feeling. I feel like I can sustain that for another 1,000 meters. If you do that workout by yourself and you realize that 1,000 meters itself felt like a 2K, that's an unrealistic target, right? Because you can't sustain that speed for another 1,000 meters after that. So that's where, okay, can I refine for the next one? I have plenty of rest. Maybe, I like to do 8 minutes, right? 8 to 10 minutes rest. And then you line up and you do the next one. Okay, can I readjust and try to do the exact same thing? Okay, I'm going to hold the exact same, or I'm going to back it up 2 splits in the first 500 and then try to see if I can drop it a little bit in a second and then see if I feel really good entering the 1,000. You go for that again and it feels amazing, especially having done one prior. Okay, well, now you know that you're giving yourself a realistic shot to hold that split or make a move at the 1,000 meter mark. So that's another example of a prep workout, right? So 8x500 kind of tests your fitness to be able to sustain that speed. 2x1K tests exposes you to the distance, right? You could do 2x1250 if you want. You could do 3x750, right? There are definitely different ways to expose yourself, but it's a little bit longer than just 500 meters so that you start to kind of feel that kick that you're going to feel when you go to do a 2K. Last one. Where are we with, how long are we in so far? 17 minutes. So, keep it relatively brief today. So last one, execution is everything. The fly and die strategy is an immature strategy. I can't stress this one enough because a lot of athletes will, again, with unrealistic expectations or carelessness off the line or overconfidence, but then they forget how to settle. They will go out at a pace that is so unsustainable. And that last 1,500 meters, 1,000 meters, even the last 500, they can't sustain it. And what was a goal of going 158 turns into 202, right? 16 seconds off of what you were hoping for. What turns into a goal of going, 639 ends up at, 654 because you didn't execute. And the flying and execution is everything. You have to learn how to execute your pace, right? You could be an Olympic marathon runner, but if you sprint the first 5 miles all out, you're in for a very rude awakening in the last 20 miles. No matter how experienced you are, no matter how fit you are, because you mis-executed. It's the same thing for a 2K. And again, the fly and die strategy never works. It doesn't. You may challenge that by saying, hey, I PR'd on my last test and I ripped the first 500 and I had a really challenging middle 1,000 and then I was able to bring it home in the last 500. Okay, well, especially for high school athletes, chalk that one up more to you're young, you've been training, you're fit, and you have a high growth curve because you're very early in your run career. But what you're missing out on is understanding what are you truly capable of with a well-executed strategy, with a well-executed test. If you flied and died your way to a 3-second PR, you went from 7:59 to 7:56. Okay, well, if you executed a race plan that was a little bit more within your wheelhouse, there's a chance that you went 7:52. So think about it like that. How do I think a little bit more beyond just in the moment and create a plan that can help set me up to really train like an endurance athlete, test like an endurance athlete, like an experienced endurance athlete, right? Like that Olympic marathon runner. They would never do that. They would never sprint the first 5 miles. Same thing exists for 2K, right? 500-meter test, you can get away with it, right? Just go mode, right? 2,000 meters, you're talking about 6, 7, 8 minutes of hard work. You sprint the first 500, you're in a very challenging spot, right? We have a lot of podcasts, past episodes that talk a lot about this. Some really, really good ones where we dive into race execution and strategy and stuff like that. But again, just because the fly and die strategy worked on your last one, that's probably more just because your experience is starting to come around. But what you're leaving on the table is room for a lot more visible, objective results. So that's what I want you to think about. So with that, I love this conversation. I love talking about helping athletes set themselves up for success with 2,000-meter testing, with any testing, right? Again, it's about building confidence on the erg. And the winter is that time where we can dial it in on the one test that all of us kind of hold our name to, right? The 2,000-meter one is the one that we're always talking about. Again, I think that you should love erging in general and training in general, and whether it's a 5K, 6K, or 2K. But this is the one that everyone's thinking about, whether it's for boat placement in the future or college recruiting. But the last thing is realize that it's a long winter ahead. You don't need to be a finished product in December. Get a baseline that you can then build on throughout the rest of the winter. That's how you'll truly maximize these 2K performances. If you keep bashing your head into unsustainable splits because of unrealistic expectations without prep work and misfiring execution, right? We're just running through all three. It's going to be January. You're going to be right. You're going to start to ask yourself, why aren't I progressing? Have I peaked? Have I done that? Right? No one's peaked in high school, right? You have the ability to, with good training, with good execution, truly start to see that progress come to life. And that's the beauty of the erg, right? It sends that objective feedback every stroke. That's the beautiful thing about it, and that's why I love it. So with that, thanks for bearing with me as I chat about momentum. See if you can get yours, see if you can gather your momentum and keep it going throughout the winter season. That's how you're going to look back come March and be like, wow, I strung together some really, really good weeks, and I started to appreciate the erg, and I was able to see that on 2K day because the 2K was a byproduct of developing that passion and keeping that momentum going throughout the winter. With that, I'm excited. Winter's here. I'll talk to you soon. Let me know if you need anything. And yeah, have a good day. Peace.